Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hazy Sports Podcast. I'm Jason Brown, and this week we've got a classic episode for you. We're going back to 1993, NCAA men's basketball final, Michigan versus North Carolina, the infamous Chris Webber timeout game. If you grew up in the 90s, this is probably one of the more memorable sports moments of your childhood. Certainly brought back a lot of nostalgia for us, so we're going to get into all of it today. As always, joined by good friend and co-host Charlie Ashbury, and today we've got friend of the podcast and a longtime buddy of Charlie and I's, Jeff Bradley, basketball insider. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Happy to be here. Good morning, sports fans.
We're glad to have you on. Out of our network of friends, you've probably played the highest level of basketball, so you could maybe shed some light on these things from a player's situation. I know my basketball career peaked as glue guy on the junior boys team. Charlie evolved a little bit more on senior boys at our WDSS high school. But Charlie had a nice handle, good distributor of the ball, kind of a poor man's white chocolate, some would say. And Bradley, we know you played with a few other friends of ours on the Queens team. When you're watching some of this March Madness action back, does it bring back any memories from your days at Queens?
Out of our friends, I'd say probably Dave Wilson and Mark were the more on the playing end. I didn't play a ton. I was on the team. I practiced a lot. I fouled out a lot, but it does bring back nostalgia. I mean, definitely, it makes you yearn for days of glory. Definitely sparks that. I mean, it was such a big part of the NCAA tournament also, but when you're playing anyways, it's a huge part. We had the whole bracket, drawn up on our wall in the basement. It was like you had a good idea of every team. It was also you're involved in your own team, right? So, we're playing playoffs. You get that same sort of level of excitement. So, no, every year when this time of the year comes around, it definitely brings back the love of the game. So I'm always excited for it this time of the year.
So it's perfect, obviously, with the March Madness tournament coming up. We thought it was a perfect time to do a look back on this classic game. Charlie, I remember 1993, we were in your basement, had a bunch of friends over, and I remember very distinctly watching that game together with you.
Yeah, it was one of those, like there was a few times where we would have a good group of people over to watch a game, and this was one of them. And it should have set up as a lesson for the future to never get too emotionally invested in a game. Because I just remember this was one of the first like massive disappointments as a fan of a team. And even watching it back again, I'm like, how did they lose this game? Just crushing as a 15-year-old.
I couldn't believe how many memories that brought back, and just like it was a bit like when we were doing the classic episode on the Canada Cup game. Even though you knew how it was going to end, you're getting nervous. Even though I knew how this thing was going to end, in my mind as I'm watching it back, I'm like secretly kind of wishing for a different outcome that I knew was coming. I was sort of dreading it as it was getting closer and closer to that moment. What about you, Bradley? Do you remember where you were when you were watching this game?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that era I was thinking about this when I was watching it. I grew up in Ottawa, so I'm 3 hours from Syracuse. I played on my basketball team. My dad took our team down to Syracuse for a game every year. So I saw Iverson play, saw a bunch of those guys play from that time period. And it was, to me, I mean, you followed Jordan and, the big names, Bird and Magic and all those guys, obviously in that era, and the Pistons and stuff. But you could, like, college basketball, I could name as many college basketball players, I think, as I could as NBA players at the time. You knew full teams. And so I was a Syracuse fan, but I loved that Michigan team for whatever reason. They kind of encapsulated the whole country. I mean, just North America in general, just their style and different play and stuff like that. So I think I can remember watching with my dad. It was always a staple thing. We'd watch the tournament together. And same thing, Chuck. I can remember being like, even though I wasn't a true Michigan fan, like being like disappointed by the outcome. I kept thinking, T-Bone, like you said, I'm watching the game going, shit, they may pull this out. Michigan may pull this out. And then, you're quickly reminded that it all came crashing down. But yeah, it was such a big thing. And it's like, it's any sporting moment. It's the same to me as watching almost the Flames in '89 for me. It's like kind of watching those tournament games. It was a real big deal.
And you kind of touched on it there, just like the iconic nature of college basketball at the time. I remember, I think I was in grade 9, and you remember the baggy shorts becoming the big thing, the way the Fab Five influenced culture, and the Michigan starter jackets. I remember, I don't know how it was at your school, Bradley, but I remember the big starter jackets back then were the Wolverines and the Georgetown Hoyas.
And LA and the Raiders, Oakland Raiders.
The Raiders, and I think the Charlotte Hornets gear had a bit of a run there with Larry Johnson on the team. But yeah, so it was definitely cool watching back and just remembering what it was like when you were so invested in college basketball. And as I was looking forward to the tournament this year, just realizing how little I actually know about it outside of Cooper Flagg and a couple key players like that. It just was such a different dynamic back then when you had guys staying longer. But the thing that made this team so unique was the 5 freshmen on the team. And I was catching back the 30 for 30 documentary that they did on the Fab Five just to kind of refresh my memory. Pretty cool how that all happened. Like Juwan Howard was first big recruit they landed. Then they got Jimmy King, Ray Jackson, who were pretty big prospects down in Texas. And then I forget whether Weber committed before Jalen. I think he did.
I think he did. I think Rose was the last guy. I think he was.
But essentially, like, what a recruiting class. I think Weber was the number 1 ranked high school player at the time. I think Juwan Howard was like 6. Jalen was 8 or 9 in that range. And then the other 2 guys were in the top 30, 40. So basically all 5 of those guys were in the top 50 ranked high school players coming on board. One thing I thought was cool, right now we're used to the one and done. Seeing freshmen playing a leading role is pretty common, but I think that's why it was so unique about it at this time. And actually, so it was so rare to see even a couple of freshmen starting on a team like that, let alone the whole team of 5 freshmen. And on that note, one thing I thought was crazy when I was doing the research is that the North Carolina team had Jerry Stackhouse and Rasheed Wallace on that team as freshmen. They didn't play a minute in that game. When I was looking at the rosters, I thought, am I looking at the right year here? The Stackhouse and Wallace were on that team.
They just couldn't beat up Salvadori. They just couldn't knock them out of the way.
So before we get into the game, let's talk a little bit about the run that Michigan had get there. So they land these 5 all-star high school players. I think Howard and Weber started pretty much from the beginning of that first year. This is the year before the North Carolina game that we're talking about. Eventually, Rose got on there pretty shortly after, and then there was a while where Jimmy King was in there, so they had 4 of the 5, and then I think they were on a bit of a slide, and Steve Fisher decided to just commit to all 5 freshmen, and that's when things really took off. They went on a huge run, Duke in the finals that year. Again, that was the Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill teams. Just an awesome era for college basketball. Then that kind of them getting that close really set up the next year. Where all 5 guys were back again. And of course, they run through the tournament. I believe they played Kentucky in the semifinals and in a game that went to overtime. And
a loaded Kentucky team, too.
With Mashburn and I forget who else was.
Tony Delk.
Yeah.
Like they had 3 or 4 future NBA guys on their team as well. Like it was kind of a feat even getting past those guys.
What you were saying, Bradley, with just how well you knew college basketball back then, where there was, you've got all the big teams were there. You knew Duke from their run, Kentucky doing their thing, and I think North Carolina beat Kansas to in their semifinal game. So you got all the big teams, the Blue Bloods in there, and then we get our matchup, the game that we're going to talk about. So as you guys were watching that back, What were the things that jumped out at you the most revisiting that all these years later?
Well, right off the hop, Eric Montross was a giant, man. He was like, he's all of 7 feet. I couldn't get over how much bigger he looked. Like, because they say Weber's 6'9", and maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but Montross looked like he was 3-4 inches taller than everybody else on the floor. Once the game got going, the ball movement, like everybody's touching the ball on every possession. Like there's no one guy standing there dribbling for 20 seconds while we jack a 27-foot 3-pointer. Like the game, and it's 30 years ago, but the game looks totally different.
I agree. I was going to bounce that off you guys. Do you think that's because they didn't have to respect the three as much back then, that they were able to like really crowd the paint? The one thing that jumped out at me is every time Weber got the ball, he had like three guys up around him, like pretty much walling him off. There was just no room to move in the paint.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Bradley?
I think, well, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say too. I think the ball movement is there. The 3-point shot hadn't really been identified as like the go-to weapon. There's no lot of ISO ball. I mean, there were guys that could do ISO. I mean, a lot of those guys could break guys down. You were relying, I think the shooting type talent that was on the floor was probably diminished a lot. Or maybe just the false confidence that players have now. I mean, if you watch college basketball now, there's every kid thinks he can shoot a step back three, but they can't. There's maybe one or two guys that can, but for whatever reason, that's just the nature of basketball now. But I think it actually almost sort of made it, like I liked seeing guys challenge and the refs letting them go and stuff. And it was, Chuck, I think, we were talking this sort of outside of this when we were sort of reviewing it as well. It's the intensity on defense, was ball hounds. Like it's just, they were on the ball. Every guy is, it just seemed like there was no space or time for these guys to move. Again, maybe it's because they're not respecting the shot as much, but it was, I think, the same thing, Browner. I was saying, like, anytime the ball was in the paint, you had five guys just sitting in the key. It was a battle in there. So I think like that's the thing, but I actually kind of enjoy that ball moving around and stuff. I'm not a huge fan of ISO and the 3-point era, but I get why they do it, but it was kind of refreshing to see that kind of level, that type of basketball again.
A real telling part too, like how the game's changed. Billy Packer's losing his shit when Pelinka hits 2 threes in a row and he's like, oh my God. Whereas that's just basic stuff now every day.
Well, and Michigan didn't hit 1 3 in their game before that.
Yeah.
Not one. So they didn't have 1 game, 1 3. And so they said UNC has got that what key to the game was for Michigan to hit a 3. That was one of the keys to the game. So.
Yeah, I almost didn't recognize Pelinka without his child-sized leather jacket on. But he actually, that was kind of funny because he almost kind of got Michigan going there early, hitting back-to-back threes. But just bringing it back to the defensive play, I was watching it and thinking, I haven't seen defense like this in an NBA game for a long time. It feels more, the intensity of it felt more than an NBA game in current days. And the other thing is just like seeing I know the Fab Five had only been there for 2 years, but the North Carolina team, a lot of more seniors and juniors on the floor, and just like the physicality of those guys compared to freshman dominated teams that you see now was impressive. Like Weber was 20 years old at the time. So when you think about like how old was Zion when he played 18. So imagine Zion with another 2 years at Duke with what he would have been in.
Yeah, no kidding.
If we would have saw LeBron for a couple of years in college basketball. But you mentioned, Charlie, the size of Montross. That was one of the other notes that I had down is North Carolina had 3 7-footers to put on the floor. That had to be like, I feel like 7-footers are a little more common now. You see them, but back then that felt rare, or from what I remember, and to have 3 of them on the same team. Did that stand out to you guys?
It did, but it also, like, the zero athleticism that all 3 of them possessed. It was just like running out a couple of big pylons. Like, I can't imagine. I know Montross went to the NBA, but I'm going to guess those other guys didn't go anywhere.
I looked it up, that Salvatore played 39 games in the NBA.
Did he? Oh,
Yeah.
There you go. I stand corrected.
But You're right though, Chuck, because I think it's sort of, I like when I think Packer or Nance, one of them says they're going with a big lineup and they had two of the guys out there for a second. And I was like, how is Michigan not just destroying these guys with like
Yeah.
off-ball stuff? But for whatever reason it worked, for briefly. I don't know how much it did in the game, but yeah.
One thing that jumped out at me as we were watching is Michigan missed a lot of easy putbacks and layups throughout the game. Like this, it should have never been that close. And I think that's why it felt almost frustrating knowing that it was going to come down to this moment where you really wanted Michigan to finish it off. And they were just missing some easy putbacks throughout the game.
And they clearly had the athletic advantage at the guard spot. Like I thought Jalen Rose and even Jimmy King, who had a pretty decent game, could have exploited that big time. But that was the game back then. You pumped it inside. You tried to get their guys in foul trouble and hopefully gain an advantage that way. But I think they really missed an opportunity to use their athleticism. And Juwan Howard was dog shit in this game. He couldn't get a shot to save his life.
I didn't want to step on, are we sure he was good at his job thing? But he was my nominee for this. I didn't realize how bad, like watching that game, he was horrific, like really bad.
Yeah, you barely even heard his name.
Yeah. Yeah. They said I was going to say, I think they mentioned with like 5 minutes left, Michigan hadn't lost a game all year leading up with 5 minutes left. So it's
30-0.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole game you would see moments like of flashes of that athleticism and that chemistry between them, but I think it was a good coaching job from Dean Smith on the defensive end. It just felt like either Michigan was maybe a little run down from the previous game against Kentucky, but the whole game they just felt like they couldn't get that good chemistry going. They had sort of moments of it, but even back and forth, you kind of had this feeling. Of course, I knew the outcome, so of course I would have this feeling, but you could just tell from the vibe of the game, even if you didn't know the outcome, that it was one of those games that was going to come down to the last play. A lot of lead changes throughout. One kind of random thing I thought was funny is there was a play where Weber got a steal and was in the open court and came down and dunked it. And Billy Packard was furious that they did not call a technical on him for hanging on the rim. And it wasn't even that egregious. He was just running so hard that if he wouldn't have hung on, he would have like almost done a backflip off the rim. And I just thought it was funny how mad he got. I was like, that's classic old school white guy announcer.
100%. And it seemed like he was waiting for that because he wasn't on that rim for more than a half second and he was already, oh, look at this. They should give him a technical for that.
I can't believe he didn't get a technical. They need to be enforcing this rule better.
And then I was just watching last night's basketball highlights and Russell Westbrook had a dunk and he's hanging on it with one hand spinning around. And it was like it's totally night and day. Billy sure had a bone to pick with that.
I had the same note. I couldn't believe how bad he was losing his mind over it. It's just like, it's mind blowing. Because there was a weird era there about the rim was almost sort of sacred. I can just tell, like, we went through it too in university, actually, even when I was playing. You couldn't dunk and warm up for one of the years that we were playing. You couldn't touch the rim. Yeah, so they would tee you up. They would tee you up for that. And anything kind of excessive, they were super quick for that. It was like the Holy Grail, you couldn't touch it. So it might have been the era too, but Packer losing his mind was hilarious on that. You're right, Chuck. He was waiting to call it. He was like hoping someone would dunk and bang.
He had it holstered, just waiting for someone to touch the rim.
I guess one of the takeaways was, before we get into the end of the game here, is it wasn't the greatest game. Like it was great from a physical standpoint, but there wasn't a lot of flow to it. Neither team seemed to be able to really get into an offensive rhythm. But it was I still felt like it was really entertaining just because of the intensity and the stakes. But as we're getting closer, one of you guys mentioned when the announcer says 5 minutes left, Michigan with the lead. Michigan's never blown a lead when they're up 5, and I'm like, I know it's coming here. And so it was a pretty exciting final 5 minutes, and then of course it was almost eerie as we're getting down to that last 20 seconds. Nance and Packard both must have mentioned it 2 or 3 times, like Michigan with no timeouts left. And it was just like, as they're saying it and you know what's going to happen, it was crazy. So we'll break down sort of the last 30 seconds. From what I remember, Michigan put North Carolina on the foul line. They were up by 1 at the time. They were in the bonus, so they hit the first free throw to go up 2, missed the second one. Weber grabs the rebound. I believe there's about 20 seconds left at this time. He looks like he's about to call a timeout. He doesn't. He's got Rose for an outlet pass. Goes to do it. Then I don't know if he was worried that it was going to get picked off. And then, of course, travels, which was obvious, and the announcers are freaking out about it.
It's blatantly obvious.
In hindsight, it might have almost been a blessing if he would have got called for that traveling, because at least they would have still had 20 seconds left, down by 2, and they wouldn't have North Carolina on the line. But that doesn't happen. He gets away with the travel, goes to the corner, gets trapped immediately by North Carolina, kind of panics and calls the timeout. And from there, you see him instantly look at the bench and get mad at the bench. I think he claims that people on the bench were yelling for him to call the timeout. Jalen Rose says on their previous timeout, they drew up the play and made it very clear that they didn't have any timeouts. But what was your thoughts when you're watching that back?
So 2 things. So I was reading ESPN article, and the theory there is it was James Voskuhl, who was one of their bench guys, said everyone on the bench was screaming no timeouts. So I'm sure part of it is he heard timeout. But if you're in that situation, why isn't anybody yelling that anyways? Right? You're in a crowd, the crowd's going crazy. You're probably only going to pick out the one word. So that's one of the theories. That's never been Weber's never said anything about it, but this was a guy who was on the bench that said they were screaming no timeouts.
But yeah, it's like running through the airport yelling, "I don't have a bomb."
Exactly. And then the other thing after watching it, I'm like, the way the teams were shooting that game, I'm not sure Michigan even makes a shot anyways, even if they get it off, because it was probably going to be a terrible shot.
Well, it's funny because I remember I was talking about watching the game with my dad, and with the travel part, like it was almost the DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We're both like, we're pointing at the screen, right? We're yelling, he traveled. Even though we're cheering for Michigan, I was just like, he traveled. Like I'm yelling that. I can remember clearly saying like he traveled, and I remember my dad saying, "Oh, he got away with it. And then I was thinking, okay, he got away with it. Now they've got something. And then I couldn't figure out at the time why he dribbled directly into the corner, because I was like, he's dribbling in there with the mentality like because if you're doing that, usually the timeout call comes as soon as you cross half, like you're going to go towards your bench, call timeout. So he's dribbling towards that way and then kind of continues. And I was reading oral history of the game too from the UNC side. UNC knew they were sending 2 guys at Weber right away anyways on that play. So it's a really weird and odd thing. I don't know what the idea was too, to dribble that far into the corner on that effort there. It's an odd thing. Like Weber shouldn't have been handling the ball at that side anyways. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, you can just, like you said, Chuck, that a bench yelling no timeout is the same as like you've been in games too, in a basketball game when someone's yelling don't shoot and all the guy hears is shoot, right? And so you're going, what the fuck? How'd you put that shot up right there? We're telling you not to shoot. Now all the guys hearing is, all I heard was shoot. All I heard was shoot the whole time. Same in hockey, right? Guys yelling, or not to pass, like, they're in a stick. And it's funny because guys in games, those situations, like you equate to hockey, there's lots of times guys yell no, 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 like to not say, Brown, you guys play hockey a lot, the pass across to maybe it's like, you're serving one up through the middle, but the guy was telling you not to. And in your head, you're firing across anyway. So I think it's, Chuck, I think you're right. I think hearing from the bench, he probably just heard timeout, and just his natural reaction was to call that.
And then as soon as he realized what he had done, it's like you see his soul leave his body instantly. Like that is one of the toughest things to watch. And like you could almost feel it 20, 30 some years later through the TV screen and just know, wow, that guy is completely crushed. And they still had 11 seconds left to play, and you just see them as they're on the sideline. In his eyes, he's left his body. He is off on another planet. If he wouldn't have called the timeout, there's still a pretty good chance. I was reading an article where say a lot of the North Carolina guys are actually a little pissed about it, because the story gets told as if the reason he called the timeout is the only reason they lost. That would have been a pretty tough time to get a good shot off. They needed a 3 would have won it, a 2 would have tied it, but not a lot of time on the clock. North Carolina playing pretty good defense, so definitely no guarantees that they would have won it otherwise. So pretty wild, pretty fun watching that back, seeing what college ball was like at that time and reliving that moment. Because I think there's other games that I think are more memorable, but I was trying to think if there was any other singular sports moments that I remember as much. Like I think like the Joe Carter home run was one where there's like that specific moment captured in time that you remember as clearly, but there's not too many that I felt like when I rewatched that, it took me back to that specific moment so clearly.
Yeah, it's as soon as I turned it on, it all came back. Like I used to love that team so much. Like I don't watch much college basketball anymore, but I can remember waking up Saturdays and just wanting to watch those guys, and what a crushing crushing moment. And to Weber's credit, like to show up after and do the press conferences and stuff is pretty, that's had to be awful for the guy, but he stood up, and I can't imagine talking about it right after.
I'm sure he probably doesn't remember much of it, and then I don't think he talked about it again after for years to come.
Time.
All right, well that's a pretty good wrap up of the game. Why don't we kind of get into our breakdown of some of our different categories and awards? Usually we start things off with our primetime awards. So watching it back, looking at people, places, or things that were in their prime at this time. Charlie, why don't you kick us off?
All right, this was peak for white, unathletic big men. Right? Well, not even just Salvatore and Montross and that Ledstrom, but they also had this Henrik Rodel. I don't know if you noticed him.
That German guy.
Yeah, he was brutal too. And then Scott Cherry and also Pat Sullivan. Like this North Carolina team was just like an old white gym class, basically. And like again, I don't know how Michigan didn't go like full athleticism at these guys instead of dumping it into the post all the time. But peak white guy for sure.
That's what made me so shocked when I found out that Stackhouse and Rasheed Wallace were on the bench, because you're telling me those guys as freshmen are giving you a better chance to win than that German kid with the red hair. I forget his name, but
Henrik Rodel.
Henrik Rodel. You're telling me Jerry Stackhouse is not going to give you a better chance to win than Strodel. What about you, Bradley? Anything jumping out as sort of a prime time for this one?
Black sports socks is probably one.
Definitely.
I think very short-lived. I mean, it might be back a bit now, but I mean, I can even remember I wore black basketball socks then at that point. And black shoes and black socks on a tall white person makes you look even slower than you already are. It was not a smart clothing attire. The other quick peak thing I was going to say prime, I was going to say is Ray Jackson, just because this was probably that Fab Five thing. I went back and looked. He's basically, that was the end of it for Ray Jackson after this team, and nothing never came about anything else after that. So I think this was kind of like the fact that everyone knew who Ray Jackson was and then just kind of disappeared into the ether is definitely one for that.
Ray Jackson is almost a parallel to Michel Goulet in that 87. They both had crazy stashes and both looked like they were 30 years older than they probably were.
Yeah, good call. Yeah. And I think he's the only one that didn't play in the NBA. Jimmy King didn't have a long career, but he actually got drafted by the Raptors, I think in the second round. So yeah, that was definitely peak Ray Jackson.
What do you
I'm gonna
got,
go
Cheese?
Oh, I was gonna go a little bit more macro and say, was this peak college basketball? We're coming off the Duke run with Leitner, Hurley, Grant Hill. You've got the Fab Five is probably from a popularity and cultural perspective as big as a college basketball team has ever been. 2 years later is when we started getting guys drafted out of high school. So this was 93, I believe. Kevin Garnett was started that trend of guys coming out of high school. So all of a sudden you start you get some pretty good talent that now you're used to getting that talent for 3-4 years in college. Now we're going right to the NBA, and it just kind of felt like there was some good years. Definitely, it didn't go directly to sort of what we're experiencing today with the one and dones, but I feel like this was the peak in terms of that. Maybe the five obviously like the Bird and Magic era was pretty good, but that was, I feel like, from a mainstream perspective, this is probably the peak for college basketball.
100%.
Yeah, it was for me anyways. Like I was pretty invested back then. Now I'm lucky if I'll watch the tournament, but other than that, I couldn't tell you who's good or what's happening.
Yeah, I watch it still pretty regularly, and I could have a hard time telling you who's who. So I think I think you're bang on, T-Bone. Like I think that era was the fact that they made it like must-see TV is like, I was saying, I was a Syracuse fan and I wanted to watch Michigan games. It's like I wasn't a Bulls fan, but I wanted to watch all the Jordan games, right? I turned on TV to watch Jordan. In that era, I mean, people like the Duke created that love. It's almost like a Yankees thing. There's that love-hate thing. Like people watched to cheer against Duke because you hated Leitner, you hated Bobby Hurley, like you hated those guys, or you're a big Duke fan. It just, I think there was like that level, the fact that I knew teams that I hated in college was like such a big thing. So yeah, I'd agree 100%. This is like prime era. I mean, you had those brief flashes. The Carmelo run as a rookie in Syracuse created a lot of buzz when they won the championship. Kevin Garnett at Texas, like that type of stuff. But yeah, nothing like the early 90s, mid 90s. I think that's big.
I don't even know why I hated Duke. Like I had this an irrational hate for them, and there's I don't really know why. I guess just because I like the Michigan side of it better. But now I probably appreciate that kind of basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's switch it up to next category. What's aged the best? So, Bradley, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Well, I was going to say the uniforms I talked about before. I love those uniforms. It's just that changed. I mean, everyone, like, as soon as you saw that, it went from like that tight, you picturing like, guys' junk is hanging out of those old shorts, like just so didn't leave much to the imagination. And you kind of had this sort of new wave, and every kid wanted those baggy shorts. I mean, I know I did, that type of thing. So I was going to say, I think like that uniform for sure. And another thing I was going to say that aged the best is coaches wearing suits on the sideline. It's nice to see, again, like a level of sort of like respect and authority. Every coach had a full suit on, and now it's like, you see like Nick Nurse in the NBA, and he's got like, a hoodie on, he's got his hat backwards. It's just such a different time, but it's, yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, on your point about the jerseys, would you guys say North Carolina, Michigan jerseys, two of the best jerseys in college basketball?
Yeah, those are definitely top two, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
What about you, Charlie? What's aged the best from your perspective?
What changed the best for me is Jim Nance calling games. Doesn't matter if it's football or basketball. That guy is money. I hope that he keeps going.
Absolutely. I had that one written down too, and it's crazy how he sounds almost exactly like he sounds now. Yeah, and the range of the Masters to basketball to whatever he's doing.
And even having Billy Packer there, it almost reminds me of him and Romo, where you got this unhinged guy just making ridiculous comments, and Nance kind of reels it back in and calms things down.
Jim Nance is the Rod Black of American broadcasting. Very versatile. Very versatile.
He's smooth. No, that was great. Actually, so I had three things written down. I had the jerseys, Jim Nance, and the third one I had was team defense and just the physical play, which I know we kind of touched on earlier, but just the fact that we weren't so dependent on the three-pointer back then, that there was a lot more physicality down below. I enjoyed that. And what I think the main thing I noticed just from that perspective is the refs were letting them play a little bit more. Like, now you got guys like SGA and James Harden that are game planning ways to, they're not the only two, but the first two that come to mind of just the way they almost play their game to get fouls, to draw fouls. Like, guys weren't doing that as much. They were going hard, but they weren't trying to sell every time they got bumped. They weren't trying to sell it for a foul call, and it just made for better basketball to watch. Even though the offense sometimes wasn't able to get into rhythm, I just appreciated the intensity there. So, all right, well, let's those are good ones in terms of what's aged the best. So, what's aged the worst? Do you want to start us off there, Charlie?
Sure. So for my what's aged the worst was the Goodyear blimp. At one point they cut to the Goodyear blimp, but it's on the outside at night in a closed stadium. Like, what a spectacular view of the lights on top of the stadium. Like, I didn't understand that. I've never understood the fascination with the Goodyear blimp. I don't get that. And I know they don't do it as much. I think it's the MetLife blimp now, but like, I don't know if that was just new technology and we had to show that we can take a picture of the roof of this closed stadium. Just bizarre to me.
That's a good point. Yeah, the Goodyear blimp did have a pretty good run there. I wonder when that started. I'll jump on that because the one I had was kind of in the same vein. Mine, what's aged the worst, was the seating setup at the Superdome.
God, yeah.
I don't know if you guys noticed it, but there was no seats on the ends of each court. There was like just tarps. It was like the outdoor game for hockey that we were talking about, where they had sort of stands. Like, obviously this arena is not optimized for basketball, so they had sort of the stands set up on the sides of the courts, but on the ends there was just nothing for, it just was like, seemed like a terrible basketball atmosphere to watch a game.
And if you all noticed, when they were shooting free throws, they almost did like a side view so you couldn't see the end too.
Yeah.
Which was really weird from a broadcasting standpoint.
They say it's hard to shoot in those scenarios too, because your depth perception off the backboard is thrown off too for players. So they often say, like, in large, like huge, like a football stadium type venues, it's shooting is actually kind of difficult. It's kind of you get thrown off by it. Like, I went to like those Syracuse games, they play in the Carrier Dome, and it's like kind of what San Antonio used to do. They turn it sideways, not the lengthwise of it. And it's a super weird environment. And it also makes you think the Raptors started playing in the Skydome. And, like, we went to a game, actually, like buddies of ours, like Mark and some people from school. We took a bus trip from Queens in 97 where we went to watch, it was Raptors Bulls that game. And we were sitting in the top of the 500s at the Rogers Center, and you couldn't see shit. You basically had an idea if a team was moving one way or the other way on the court, but you couldn't tell at all. And funny enough, that was one of the few games. I think the Bulls lost 10 games that year, and the Raptors were one of those games.
I think, did we go see a Raptors game or a Bulls game at the Skydome as well, Charlie? I feel like I remember that.
I went to the first ever Raptors game, and same thing. We were up in the 500s. It's just a horrible. Might as well been in the fucking Goodyear blimp with that view. Like you couldn't see anything.
Did they play in the Skydome their first year, or was it
Yeah.
just in
No, the
those
whole year.
exhibition season?
No, they played
Wow.
the whole year.
2 years, I think.
Yeah, you might. And then I think they played in Maple Leaf Gardens for a little bit, for
Yeah.
1 year or something like that. Just a fantastic viewing experience.
Nice. Yeah. Well, what about you, Bradley?
Just two real quick ones too. Chuck, you already touched on, but I was going to say H. Porley was big, white, lumbering centers. There was a brief, highlight. You had Greg Ostertag in Kansas. You had Bryant Big Country Reeves. Those guys had brief glimpses of success, but the big lumbering white center kind of disappeared until Jokic somehow has made it very, very popular and very, somehow the best player in the world now is a big lumbering white center. So, maybe it's come full circle. And the other quick one was just 35-second shot clocks in college is just unbelievably painful to watch. The fact that you can hold onto a ball that long, possessions, like it seems like teams had like 8 possessions a half. That's what it felt like. Just hang on. So I'll say the 35-second shot clock. I'm glad that went by the wayside.
One more I have to kind of layers on what you just said, Bradley, is what's aged the worst is not having the score or the time on the television broadcast. Like, how did that not drive us crazy back then? Where it's like there's literally 5-minute stretches where they're not putting the score up, and at pretty critical points in the game, and you're like, wait, is Michigan down 6? Are they down 10? Are they?
And it was always just a camera shot of the actual like jumbotron or scoreboard that they placed down in front of onto the screen too. It was just someone could walk in a room going, "Who's winning?" and you're like, "I don't know, I'm not sure."
But they would flash it up every now and again, but it's just you're so used to it now that it's like hard to. I actually thought it was maybe just a glitch with the YouTube. I actually checked to see if there was other versions of the game on YouTube because I thought maybe it was just the version that I had it cut off somehow, but I think that's just how it was back then. Okay, yeah, good stuff there. So now we're moving on to the Bronny James. Are we sure this guy is actually good at his job award? Who wants to jump in first on that one?
I'll hop in here, and it goes back to someone we already mentioned, but Henrik Rodel. So you alluded that they had these 2 future NBA superstars on their bench. So I had to do a deep dive on Henrik Rodel. So the guy played all 4 years of college. He finished with a 3.4 points per game average. He's shooting just under 40%. And the whole time I'm like, how is this your best option off the bench in a national championship game? I don't know if Henrik Rodel had a relative on the board or something, but this guy should not be playing.
Yeah, I was surprised to see him on the court as well. The guy I had, which I don't know if it's fair or not, but I would say Steve Fisher's who I had. I don't remember enough of it to say whether he was a good coach or a bad coach, but it seemed like he got out-coached in this game. Just the way North Carolina was like substituting strategically. It's like Dean Smith was playing chess and Fisher was playing checkers. It was like Fisher just almost kind of just, hey guys, bunch of talented guys, you figure it out and go win this, which probably worked most of the time. But
yeah,
it felt like I left that saying, is he actually a good coach or did he just have great talent?
there was a crazy part too, like in the last 4 minutes when Dean Smith brought in like 4 bench guys.
Yeah.
And even Billy Packer was like, they're just trying to steal possession here, get their guys a rest. And I'm like, that's pretty ballsy when, you're hanging on to, I think at the time it was a 2-point lead. And he brought in 4 bench guys just to give a couple other guys a rest. It was kind of ballsy and it paid off.
And they were talking too, Brad, about the Fisher part. They kept commenting like, there's a reason why this guy was 31, and I can't remember the record they were saying. They were talking about his prowess, and I was looking at it going, he's getting same thing. I'm like, he's getting out coached in this game. Like, he hasn't made any adjustments to what they're doing. Like, North Carolina was just slamming everyone into the paint. He really wasn't doing anything else. And so, yeah, I'd agree with that too. That's a good point.
What about you, Bradley? Did you have anyone that sort of felt like a weak link there on the court?
I kind of mentioned it earlier. I know it's not truly fair because he had a pretty good NBA career, but I was still going to say Juwan Howard in this game. They went to him a lot, but he was just so bad in this game. I know he's actually, I mean, that's not truly fair. Like I said, he had a good NBA career, but, if you watch this game without knowing anything at all about who these guys were, you'd be saying, like, why do they keep going to this guy? So, but yeah, I would say him. The other small glimpse I had, it's not really fair to him too, because he was kind of like Chuck was talking about that unhinged part, which is good, as Billy Packer. When he kind of lost his mind on a swish once, and he said, and he goes, it didn't even hit the rim. And it was like the first time he had ever seen a swish before. And I was like, Billy, how long have you been watching basketball? And he's just going crazy that it didn't hit the rim. So I just thought, I'm like, maybe Billy doesn't actually, and he was getting angry at Weber for hanging the rim. I'm like, maybe Billy isn't the right color guy for this, but that's it.
Swishes and dunks are really hot buttons for old Billy. Oh, those are good. So usually we wrap things up with internet research that we found that was interesting along the way. What about you, Charlie? Did you come up with any sort of interesting tidbits that we didn't talk about?
The only thing I read and I thought it seems a little bit internet made up was that old Michigan players were writing letters to the athletic department complaining that this was not the Michigan way and they didn't like the shorts and the socks. And I'm like, so this was pretty early internet, so it's not like you could just fire off an email. I have a hard time believing people are sitting down penning letters to their old school complaining that their basketball team made back-to-back finals.
Yeah, they touched on that actually in the 30 for 30 when I was watching it back. It got pretty racist and pretty crazy actually, some of the stuff that was coming through your and it's like, wow, yeah, it's hard to believe. And this is coming from their own alumni and they're playing pretty well, but they didn't like the style and the moxie that they were playing with.
I didn't realize that Montross was recruited to play Michigan, though. I didn't know that.
Yeah, his dad was a Michigan player.
Yeah, so that's not like anything kind of crazy, but I didn't know that part about it. There was something funny in the oral history of the game from the UNC player side was, I guess, Dean Smith made the players change roommates on the road all the time. He didn't want guys having the same roommate when they were traveling to sort of get to know everyone on the team. So, like get to hang out with Strobel or whatever, and see what he's doing. Montross, they all had the same story about Montross. He was like an obsessed bass fisherman. And so the players would wake up in the morning and he'd have some bass fisherman on TV and the player would like, Eric, what are you doing? And he would just turn around and go, just listening to him. And it's every player in the oral history of the story all talked about Montross' obsession with bass fishing, which I thought was kind of funny.
I like they, in the middle of the championship game, they broke down his haircut, how he went to the barber with his dad to get that tight fade, but then his dad didn't get the same haircut. So that was some good Montross stuff there. I didn't have anything like too crazy, but I think the most interesting research I was doing is I was just kind of curious to see how everybody evolved in their NBA career. And I was always under the assumption, or I thought I remembered that all of the Fab Five went into the draft the next year, but it was actually just Weber and the other four guys came back the next year. And I think Howard was pretty dominant that year. I think they got put out in the Elite Eight the next year at the tournament, but it kind of made me wonder, was there any chance if that timeout didn't happen and they would have lost, is there any chance Weber would have come back? Probably not, because he was pretty much a lock for the number one overall pick, but that would have been a cool what if scenario if that ended differently and he came back and we saw all five of them back again.
Plus, I don't think Rodel ended up going to the draft either. I'm pretty sure he came back for another go round. but not as successful for Henrik Rodel his last year.
I looked up basically the starters, like guys who played in that game, like how many NBA games came out of that game, just because you had like an idea of like kind of what the level of talent was that made the final. Michigan players had 3,212 NBA games out of that. North Carolina had 1,200. So it kind of shows like, and somehow UNC sort of pulled that out. Like, Donald Williams was named MVP of that game. He never played a game.
Yeah, I thought that was crazy.
Yeah.
So we probably missed peak Donald Williams
Peak
here
Donald
too, along
Williams.
with Ray Jackson.
Gets overshadowed by Rodel.
Rodel's kind of like the Rashport of this thing, sort of the guy we didn't know we needed in our life. Watching it back again. Well, that was fun. That kind of covers all our topics. That was a pretty good deep dive on the game. It was great looking back on all that as we kind of look forward to March Madness this year. Any good storylines? I saw, Bradley, you probably paying more attention to this, but obviously Cooper Flagg's kind of the big prospect, pretty much consensus #1 pick this year. Who else should we be watching out for that's fun to watch this year on the college scene?
The two guys at St. John's, Bailey, and I'm blanking on the other guy's name now, but they're really good. Both those guys. There's like they say if you're in the top 5 or top 6 in the draft now, you're going to get potential all-star. So compared to last year where they said, you know, Ricochet may have been drafted like 11th in the draft year before that. So this year's class is really good. There's a lot of good talent. But again, it's kind of weird though. Like I've been watching sort of sporadically enough games, but again, nothing kind of locks in. I couldn't really tell you that, you know, like Auburn's the #1 ranked team in the country. I can't tell you one player on Auburn. It's really strange. You know, and the Cooper Flagg thing, he just rolled his ankle. Duke blew a 24-point lead last night to UNC, which is crazy. UNC had a chance to tie it, and the guy stepped in the free throw line. He was shooting a free throw, he had a lane violation, which is wild. But it's not a way you want to lose the game. But yeah, I mean, so I think this time of the year is conference tourney time is really cool too. I think that's kind of when you get some more Cinderella stuff, and it's good. It's if you see teams, I think momentum's a big thing in all of them. So if a team gets in a hot streak in a conference tourney, it usually kind of carries over into tournament play because you get some level of confidence. So with conference semis and finals coming up, I think those type of things are good.
Nice. Well, yeah, we're recording this on Saturday. They're going to be announcing the bracket tomorrow night then, I guess. And then we could start filling out our brackets on Monday. And we've got a special hazy bracket that we're doing with the guys for the bachelor party weekend. Charlie, how's that different from the other brackets out there?
All we're doing, since we won't be together to run the whole thing, we're just focusing on the first 2 nights, so your Thursday and Friday. So you basically got 16 games you got to pick. Then our pool's done Friday night. So the last game Friday night, hopefully we'll decide it for someone. That would kind of make it exciting if it was down to a couple people. But I think it's a more fun way to do it, and you're not invested for a month.
I think you'll get 32 games, right, Chuck? There's 16 on both days, I think, right? But that's still,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I like it too, because I think, you know, usually the most satisfaction you get out of your bracket is when you pick the 15 seed that beats the 2 seed or one of those crazy upsets. But in a regular bracket, it really doesn't make a difference, because you get 1 point for it. That team loses the next round, and you're sort of like, oh, I had 3 underdog picks come through for me in that first round. But unless you've got, you know, a couple teams in the Final Four, or for sure the team that wins it doesn't really matter. So we're compressing all the excitement of the first 2 days. So
you want to win brackets, you got to have at least a couple teams in the Final Four. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah. So before we go to bed Friday night or Saturday morning, as it might be, we will know the winner of
the champ. Yeah.
Hey, Brown,
nice.
I do want to add a quick thing here just before I know, as we're getting close to wrapping up. But you were talking about the highlight of your basketball career. It peaked in, I think, your maybe public school or where it was. But there was a time
grade 9.
Was a time when you took a trip down to Kingston and you threw a backdoor lob to somebody.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. I think, yeah, I didn't get off the bench much when I played junior boys in the first couple of years high school, more of a glue guy, but then had sort of a second coming out party. Yeah, when we were visiting you guys down at Queens, you had access to the basketball. I was kind of known for my reverse layup sort of moves. That was kind of the one trick in my bag, as not being a big vertical guy. But yeah, Bradley, you and I were on the same team. I saw you break free from Bedness there, shake him loose, and I had the ball and I tossed it up for the alley-oop, and that was the one and only time I've been part of an alley-oop in a real game of basketball. So yeah, I always remember that moment fondly.
I just remember I was thinking, fuck, he's actually going to throw it to me here.
Yeah, it was like slow motion. I'm like, I can't believe it's happening. And when you put it down, I was like, wow, that actually looked like a real alley-oop. It was a real alley-oop.
It was a reverse too, which is just even more exciting.
Well, we wanted to put a little mustard on it for the boys, and as we proceeded to go out and drink, ungodly amounts of beer after that, I was almost surprised we managed to squeeze in an actual game of basketball that weekend. But
yeah.
We were young enough then we could do both the basketball and the drinking nights in the same night.
You don't foresee it happening next weekend?
I don't think so. Yeah, I actually was wondering that. Usually we have a tradition down at Dave's where we have our bump competition when we get together for March Madness. I don't know if there's a basketball court there, or definitely not a court, but a hoop. We'll probably have to replace that with a little ping pong or billiards or foosball. Some combination of everything. But yeah, looking forward to next weekend. Yesterday was 20 degrees here in London. Barney's patio was packed at 3:30 in the afternoon with a lineup. So that's always a good sign when you get one of those days in March. Today looks a little less nice, pretty rainy, but hopefully we get a nice blast of sunshine next weekend for the cottage. Either way, it'll be a good time, and it'll be good to catch up with you guys face to face. So I think with that, we'll wrap up the episode. Bradley, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Great catching up with you, and yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.